Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome back one of my favorite people in the music world. You know him from interviews with probably every name you can possibly think of in the music business. He is a contributing editor at Rolling Stone magazine, a Grammy winner, and currently teaches creative writing at the University of Pennsylvania. He probably has the best job in the world, and I'm honored to have him back with us. Anthony DeCurtis, hello and welcome back.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for having me again. It was a great pleasure the first time, and I'm sure we'll have some fun this time too.
Oh, I know we will. I hope so. So excited to have you back. First thing that I wanted to mention, because it's been a few months since we've been together, Keith Richards put out a cover of Lou Reed's "I'm Waiting for
Oh,
the Man," and I know you have a very strong link to Mr. Lou Reed. And I
yeah.
want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I wrote a biography of Lou called Lou Reed: A Life. Knew him, pretty well when he was alive, and I have to say, I was, when I saw that Keith had done the cover. On the one hand, it seemed a little on the nose. I didn't, before I listened to it, I go, oh, okay. And, Keith, I mean, as great as Keith is, he occasionally has a tendency to just kind of like, walk through things like that or just, not take them as seriously as I would like him to. But man, I thought his version was sensationally good.
Hmm.
I was just stunned. And
Yeah.
it was such a pleasure to hear. And I'd certainly recommend to anyone who hasn't listened to it already to check it out. Um, it really shows, I think, the regard in which he held Lou Reed. And he really sort of rethought the song without. I don't so much like, when sometimes people do covers and it's, uh, you know, they sort of stand on their head by way of trying to be original with it. Whereas I felt like Keith's version of "I'm Waiting for the Man" was very much his take, but very recognizably the song, and very much a tribute to Lou Reed. So it was satisfying in every regard. Yeah, I thought it was just great.
Yeah. Totally match made in heaven. It got me thinking, could we be open to the idea of a Keith Richards covers album? Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, I mean, if Keith decided he wanted to do something like that, you know, um, it. Obviously, he's done such great, sort of reggae covers, and I mean, it would be very exciting. Wouldn't hurt, to hear him do. Uh, Obviously, we've heard them in various outtakes and stuff, but his version of a Stone song or two. That.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that would be fun.
A reimagining. I mean, the closest like that would be what he did with Aretha with Jumpin' Jack Flash.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
um, but yeah, I'd love to hear Keith do some Merle Haggard or something like that. That'd be wild.
Oh, sure, of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He did Apartment Number 9, didn't he? God, who did the original version of that? Was that Willie Nelson? Or,
Oh,
but,
could have been.
but it was, I mean, obviously he loves all that great country stuff, so that would be lovely too.
Last time we were together, the Stones were about to release their new album, Hackney Diamonds. So we didn't get a chance to talk about it. What did you think of the new album?
Oh, I liked it. I think about half of it is really great. I know it's one of these records. I feel like people either. I mean, everybody was so excited to just have new Stones songs that there was a tendency on the part of some people to just, I think, really sort of overreact to it, and a tendency on the part of other people to just pick it apart. I don't, uh, you know, they used auto tune or whatever criticisms that people would make of it. But I think there's like a half dozen really good Stone songs on there. Which for an album by anybody is, I think, quite a good percentage. And the main thing was I was really kind of struck by the degree to which their enthusiasm about it. You really felt them in there. I think they seem to be sort of hitting the mark without trying too hard. So I was pleased with it. And of course, that, Rolling Stone Blues was really quite a nice ending.
Oh, wasn't that just hitting on many levels? It was just the right moment.
Completely. Well, it's sort of funny, because in talking about it, they've talked about, they have, um, more songs recorded. Jagger said, we've got enough for another album already. You know, it's nice to think of them still being productive. You keep your fingers crossed. I mean,
Oh yeah.
at this stage of the game, but they're feeling energized, so that's a good sign.
Speaking of criticisms around the album, did you hear about, or what are your thoughts when you hear people say that when it comes to Hackney Diamonds' new album, that it's for some people too much of a solo Mick Jagger album than a Rolling Stones record? What are your thoughts about that criticism?
That didn't really particularly occur to me. Um,
Nice.
Look, I mean, at this stage of the game, I mean, my sense is this is not based on, any kind of insider knowledge or anything, but Mick seems very much uh, alive and active, and I think certainly, Mick was the one who most wanted to get something new done, as he tends to be. I think he kind of whipped the band into shape, in that regard. I mean, as far as like, look, we've got to get this done. They've said as much. So to the degree that the record reflects that, I think um, that just makes sense.
Hmm.
Look, Keith is very devoted um, to the work that the Stones have done, and I think as far as he's concerned, if they just kind of continue to perform those songs that everyone knows and loves, uh, I think he's perfectly okay with that.
Hmm.
Jagger isn't. Not that he's much more, I think, sensitive to the criticism. I mean, listen, I think it's the stupidest thing in the world when people say, oh, they're a Rolling Stones cover band. They're just playing their hits. It's just like, performers have done their songs for many, many years. I just don't get the resentment of, going out and playing your songs for stadiums full of people who are excited to hear them. And as anybody I've ever, look, people come to me, with some regularity when the Stones go out, just, hey, my friend wants to go and he's got an extra ticket, but I don't know, they're kind of old. I haven't, I just always say, well, why don't you just go? No one has ever come back without raving, you
Hmm.
know? I mean, I remember I took a friend to see them in Pittsburgh, not on the last tour, but on uh, the previous one. Maybe it was 14 and Fire. Uh,
Hmm.
and we went there. I was in Pittsburgh. Uh, I went to the Andy Warhol Museum, and I got tickets to the show there, and I took my friend, you know, who is my age. I mean, I'm 72. So what were we done? Like 10 years ago. Early 60s or something. And he just said, that's probably the best show I've ever seen. You know, so I I dismiss the idea of you know they're a Stones cover band or whatever that really silly dismissive thing that people say about them. However, I think Jagger's sensitive to that sort of thing. I don't think he wants to feel that way,
Hmm.
and I think that's why he pushed the band. And fair enough. Fair enough. Like, why not? Why not just go into the studio? Write some songs, get them down, and go out and play them. That makes perfect sense. So I think it's just like the two. I mean, those two poles that I think always, are the axis on which the Stones exist. You know, Keith's traditionalism and Mick kind of pushing ahead, for new things. I mean, it wasn't, I'm sure it was not Keith who picked up the phone to call Sydney Sweeney, or Lady Gaga for that matter, but Jagger would really enjoy that, and I shared all that with my students when, teaching a Stones class this semester, and they liked it. I mean, they liked that. They were saying, God, it really shows like they're aware of, who's out there and this kind of stuff, I mean, it's sort of funny because, they didn't, I mean, the first thing that occurred to me, with Sydney Sweeney certainly is, like the kind of sexual vibe of it.
Mm-hmm.
Not get by Jagger, even at this stage of the game. But they didn't seem to, there's such a tendency on campuses now, to kind of look askance and stuff like that, but that didn't seem to register with them. They just they just enjoyed it,
That's amazing. Yeah, well, maybe it seems like because the video is so the feeling of it is so contagious of the fun aspect of it.
Yeah, and the fact that it it showed the Stones throughout their career, and it's not their best song, it's okay, it's a credible Stones song, but the video is a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, and to cap all the festivities for the new album, I understand you were present at their release show, club show that they put out in New York City before the album actually came out at the Racket Club. How was that?
It was sensational. I mean, it was really something. I saw the Rolling Stones for the first time in 1965 in a theater, in the afternoon on a Saturday, twice, 2 times that year. And, but I've never seen them in a club, I mean, this was a pretty small club also. I mean, there were maybe 700 people there, maybe, and they were blasting, man. And, they did, they did 3 songs from the new album, and they opened with Shattered, which was a great New York gesture.
Perfect.
And, Tumbling Dice, which is great. And then, right before the encore, which they did with Lady Gaga, to close the kind of set proper, Jagger just said, we're going to play one that you all know now. They played Jumpin' Jack Flash. And I have to say, standing that close to the band while they played that song, which I've seen them play, I don't know how many times now. It's always thrilling. It's one of their best songs and one of the great rock songs of all time. It was surreal. I mean, it was just like, am I really, as close to, the band as, I am to the wall across my tiny studio here. I mean, it was quite remarkable. It was almost hard to experience, if I could put it that way, because on the one hand, I feel like I experienced it very intently, but I couldn't not be self-conscious about it. I try in these things, I don't like to know the set list. I don't like to know what songs they're going to play. I consciously sort of avoid that.
Right.
I mean, famous for whoever happens to follow me online or whatever. When Jagger did a few promotional shows for, I think it was Wandering Spirit, he did a show at
Webster Hall.
What's that?
Webster Hall.
Yes, indeed. Which was pretty good. And I intentionally went down to the front and stood on the side, away from the rock critic cabal, because I didn't want to hear ironic comments. I didn't want to be smarter than the show. I didn't want to because nobody's really wants to give it up. Whereas I wanted to give it up. I was
be a fan.
Oh fuck, I wanted to just experience it. I did that much more successfully that time. It was a great show. It was so much fun. Um, but hearing the Stones do Jumpin' Jack Flash in a club when I was that close, I felt like I was there. I almost experienced it the way you experience a dream or something, where you're totally there, but also kind of aware, like there's something that's just quite not real about this. It was overwhelming, And then the Lady Gaga stuff was terrific, and
Yeah.
they did whatever it was, a half an hour, 40 minutes, and but that particular moment was stunning. It really was stunning.
I bet. I'm wondering if part of that magic you're wonderfully describing is also attributed to what I've heard Daryl Jones, the bass player, mentions, that when he's on stage with them and he crosses, this is his words, he crosses the path of Keith Richards' amp, it's quite a force.
Yeah, yeah. I remember, like, a friend of mine telling me when I used to live in Atlanta, and when the Stones were recruiting, they were auditioning bassists. They talked to this guy Keith Christopher, who was in the band called the Satellites,
Mm,
um, and you know, first of all, he said the Stones were really nice,
mm,
and he said, they just said, like, okay, do you know this tune? I can't remember specifically what one it was, and he goes, yeah, 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 I know it. And so they said, okay, good, like, and then Keith like would start it up, and like he goes, I just looked over, and like there's Keith Richards, and there's the vocal, and there's Mick Jagger, and there really is that moment. You know, Alan White talked about hearing John Lennon's voice in his headphones when they were recording Imagine. Like there are things that you just don't think are going to happen for you, even if you're a pretty successful musician. You
mhm.
know,
Sure.
and yeah, and in the same way, I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen the Rolling Stones or other bands that I revere, but that song "Jumpin' Jack Flash in a Club" was like that, and I'm sure for somebody like Daryl Jones, every once in a while, uh, you know, it becomes clear to him that as great as the stuff that he's done, uh, with Miles Davis and other people, you know, being with the Stones and having that level of experience that's kind of so essential to whatever that music is. If that doesn't register with you at least occasionally, I mean, it can't all the time. I mean, you have to do it, you know, uh, and you can't just be thinking like, "Oh shit, this is wild."
Hmm.
But every once in a while, you have to feel that, it has to come across.
Well, I'm so jealous that you got to be there for that. Hackney Diamonds was their, according to my count, their 31st studio album. And this April marks the 60th anniversary of their very first album, their debut. If we could go back in time a little bit to that era, speaking of different eras, that's a whole different Stones altogether. What are your memories of this period or the debut album? Is that something you often revisit?
As a matter of fact, it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
I for whatever reason, maybe it's just getting older. I find myself, with those bands. I mean, I've been very much upset. Like even with my Stones class, man, like we're barely out of the '60s. I've just been, the class is intentionally not like, oh, okay, we're starting. They form. It's in a writing program, so you can do whatever you want,
Hmm.
and so I'm just kind of hitting the stuff I want to hit, showing the movies, you know, all of it, you know but I've been very, very drawn, same thing with my Beatles class,
Mm.
like to the early stuff, like, and with the Stones, I still very much remember the first time I heard "Tell Me,"
Mm.
you know, which I once in a conversation with Jagger, and I was interviewing him about something.
Hmm.
I remember, you know, tell me it, and like he was like, well, yeah, well, that's a good song. Like, he sort of like defended it. Not that I was criticizing it, but I was sort of surprised, because you know how dismissive he can be about
Sure.
stuff. And like, I wonder why they don't ever play it. Like, it would be a very interesting song to hear them do. Anyway,
Oh
though,
yeah.
I remember hearing them, hearing that song. And the one thing I noticed is like, I'm not sure. I mean, I experienced it. I don't know that I would have had enough musical sophistication to articulate it. But like, I remember hearing like how they don't all come in at the same time, you know? Like,
Yeah.
it was so different sounding. And, I'm a King Bee and, you know, Route 66 and,
Mm-hmm.
God, what is the Marvin Gaye song they do on that album? Can I Get a
Can I
Witness?
witness? Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm Walking the Dog. They do a great version of that. It just seemed like, on the one hand, I knew all those songs. I didn't. No, that's not true. I knew the ones that were hits. I knew "Walking the Dog." Certainly, I'd heard Rufus Thomas's version. I'd seen him on TV.
Mm.
Strangely, I don't know on what show.
Wow.
Yeah. And I love the way, like, Jagger kind of, has this kind of strange vocal affectation on that song. Like he's almost imitating Rufus Thomas. Oh, Carol, of course.
Yep.
Um,
You've got. I just want to make love to you. Honest, I do.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Honest, I do. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Jimmy Reed. Um, it was. I remember again. This is something I talked to Jagger about in an interview. I said to him, I said, the Stones were a band. I felt like you guys required my defense when I was a kid. Like, people, you know, your teachers or your parents, like the Beatles, and certainly someone like, Simon and Garfunkel or whatever, whereas they didn't like the Rolling Stones, and I remember thinking, if I commit to this band, like even friends of mine, I grew up in an Italian neighborhood. There were people who still like, listening to the Four Seasons and, stuff like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and, regarded all this English stuff as problematic and particularly the Rolling Stones. And, I really consciously thought as a kid, I was 12 or 13, like, I'm going to have to, this is going to be a brawl. I'm going to have to, I'm, if I walk into school and say like, God, did you see the Stones on Shindig last night or something? How great they were or whatever. It was gonna take something from me. It was gonna require something of me. Jagger seemed interested in that. He
Mm.
seemed like kind of, I don't want to say amused, but it sort of made sense to him. I think he liked it. It was just simply true.
Mhm.
Became, I mean, there were, I used to buy all these English magazines like Rave and stuff like that. Happily growing up in Greenwich Village, I could find them.
Very cool.
And I remember looking at this picture of the Stones standing on a street corner. And I remember my cousin just said, my God, they're ugly as sin. And, they didn't look the way you were supposed to look. Like Jagger really, like, has transformed, our notions about what it is to be handsome.
Mm.
Yeah. Like Jagger, when you look at him now, looks great. Like, and you look at him even when he's young now, he looked great. But he didn't look great then. He looked off, man. Like the lips and like it didn't look like the way the lead singer of a band is supposed to look.
Right. He kind of grew into his looks.
Yeah, and altered the impression. of
Hmm.
the people looking at him,
Hmm.
you know? Like, 'cause, like, I remember the first time I went to see the Stones live, it was in the afternoon at the what was then the Academy of Music on 14th Street. It was a, movie theater essentially.
Wow.
And, they had some disc jockey there, and he's, like, going, you know, "Now, they're in the building, we've got Charlie Watts, Bill Wyman, Brian Jones, Keith Richard, and
Oh, wow.
Mick Jagger." And I remember, like, to me at that point, you know, for the stuff I'd read and just even the imagery, like Brian was the main guy, the most conventionally good looking one. The stuff I'd read sort of made it seem like he was the founder of the band. But when he said Mick Jagger at this show, the audience went fucking crazy.
Is that right?
And it was like, with both those shows in 1965, it was very difficult to hear them, you know, over the screaming. They did maybe a half hour. I remember trying to think of some of the songs they played. They played Everybody Needs Somebody to Love. They
Sure.
opened with that one the second time I saw them. They
Wow.
did I think Route 66. That's How Strong My Love Is.
Wow.
Um, God, what other ones? It was so exciting and it was pandemonium. It was very sexual. Just all these girls like running around and screaming, man. It wasn't, I mean, girls didn't act like that then. They mostly act like that now. But like,
Right.
it, to see that kind of, if you're there, people like this sounds like such a sort of pretentious comparison, but like, that whole Dionysian thing, the Maenads and, the girls going crazy chasing, Bacchus, it was a little bit like that, it was wild. And,
Yeah, it sounds wild. I mean, you're bringing up images for me because you're talking about literally their physicality and their image that they're bringing, you know, showing everybody, and it reminded me of how I feel about all this to do about. I'm not sure who plays it up. I've heard Keith play it up or play it down that their image was really manufactured by Andrew Luke Oldham, which I don't know. I think that's a little bit of a broad stroke because, like you're saying, they don't look like your typical pop stars anyway. So I don't think there was much to stretch or much to manufacture that they were the outsiders.
yeah, I mean, I don't think you can create a role that you can't play. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
I know I find it disturbing in a certain way when they talk about that. Because on the one hand, if they're talking about it, there must be truth to it. There must be, moments where, Andrew Oldham or whoever, sat down with them and said, look, this is what we're going to do. But the way I like to think about it is they were told, like, look, we're going to get rid of the suits. You know, you're going to wear whatever you want to wear. And somebody sent me a book from England, a friend, about the Stone shows in Sheffield. It's such a specific thing. But one of the things, well, this going back to really enjoying somehow re-experiencing, those early days, because like they were playing there in 1963, or 64, fourth on the bill to, you know, the Everly Brothers and Bo
Wow.
Diddley and,
What a
Little
lineup.
Richard. Um, but people talked about, oh, yeah, they just wore their street clothes. Like it made an impression that,
Hmm.
and I think if you were uncomfortable doing that, you couldn't do it. Like,
Right.
I realize, say, the Beatles and the transformation that Brian Epstein encouraged them to make. wear the suits, bow at the end of the songs, thank the audience, all this. Um, you know, if you're Paul McCartney, that's not that's not hard to do. It was probably harder for Lennon, probably a little bit harder for Harrison, but they couldn't have done it if it was that far away.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly with the Stones, I think, you see them on, like going back and looking at clips of them on, talking to, these, television hosts who are just clueless. And the Stones are just like rolling their eyes. They're not playing along. They're not, it isn't showbiz.
Right.
And I just love that as a kid. I don't know why particularly, but I guess it seemed so daring.
I love hearing that. So that was something that came across then to a lot of people like yourself, that you could tell these guys were not playing, quote, the game.
Oh, Jesus. Like, it's so hard now. I mean, I showed it to my students this time, and when the Stones first played on the Ed Sullivan Show, and
Mhm.
Jagger walked out wearing this kind of sweatshirt, a sweater, like
Right.
that was fucking shocking.
Is that right?
It was shocking. Honestly, there were like newspaper editorials about it. Your teachers talked to you about it. Your parents talked to you about it. It was, no one did that. And like that sweater, or, like, you look at clips from back then, he would wear that like playing some fucking club. Like he was going on national television in front of millions and millions of people.
Right.
Like that was not done. Like I remember seeing that and thinking like, oh shit. That's one of the moments of like, how am I supposed to go defend this? Like, this is like it just screamed like we do not give a fuck.
That's amazing. I think I read about that sweater thing, and I couldn't comprehend.
Yeah.
I thought they were exaggerating this, but
No, it's hard to bring across now. It really is hard. I love to. Probably all the newspapers that wrote about it are defunct now, but like I'd love to find some of the stuff. People were outraged. They were outraged. I mean, no one did it. No one did it. And everyone watched Ed Sullivan, and no one ever did that. Ever
wow.
went to those shows and dressed like that. It was incredible.
So Ed Sullivan had Elvis from the waist up and Jagger with a sweater. Big controversies.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Jagger walking out there like that, I would love to one time talk to him about that, if he even remembered. Like you'd have to get him in the right mood where he was willing to talk about it, because he had to know. He had to know what that was going to do.
I have to prod here. When it comes to interviewing Mick, how much of an antenna or a radar do you have about his mood and how to shift and where to go with topics or subjects? Are you really in tune when you're in front of him?
You try to be. You try to be. Jagger has more kind of self-possession than just about anyone I've ever met, like famous person or not.
Mm-hmm.
He has that thing. There's a great John Mulaney skit where he talks about writing. I don't know. Have you ever seen it?
I have.
Yeah, where he's talking about like,
That's funny.
yeah, is he nice? Is he nice? He's Mick Jagger. His name is Mick Jagger. Like it. But like
Right.
sort of what Mick is like. It's kind of, if you're in a room with him and he looks across the room, like three people get up and go, "Is there something we can get for you? You need something?" Like he's managed to sort of, I remember reading, there was a restaurant in New York called Elaine's, which was kind of a big celeb hangout, and the whole point of it was that, like, you don't make a fuss. Oh, there's Woody Allen, or there's, I don't know, Milton Berle, or there's Meryl Streep, or there's Robert De Niro, or whatever. Like, and when it closed, they asked Elaine, you know, um, well, was there anybody that ever, walked in and there was like a thing, and it wasn't that. It wasn't, oh, we're going to pretend. She goes, yeah, when Mick Jagger came. Jagger just has that thing. I don't know. It's sort of like, it's like um, people don't give it to you unless you ask for it. You have to be good. Like, because if you ask for it and and you can't convince people, then they fucking hate you. But like Jagger has managed to pull that off, where, I remember when I was doing a Rolling Stones story on them, the end of the 1989 tour. Um, it was in December. We were in Detroit. It was freezing. I was driving. I'm a New Yorker, and I didn't, driving is not something I ever like to do, and didn't learn how to do it till I was 28. But
Wow.
anyway, I was driving to this show on a fucking sheet of ice
Oh,
along, it was along that road. I think, that was the title of a Eminem movie, like 7 Mile Road or something.
oh yeah, 8 Mile, I think it's
8
called.
Mile, yeah.
Mhm.
And like I was that road
Oh
and like
wow.
fucking sliding all over the place. Anyway, finally get to the stadium. I go back and I interviewed Mick and Keith together, which was
Wow.
kind of a kick. And I interviewed Keith, and then I interviewed Mick. By the time I got to Mick, excuse me, he had like sort of really pulled back into himself. Like he was kind of getting ready to do his show.
Mm.
And I think that her name is Catherine Guinness, is sort of like waiting on him, like bringing him this and bringing him that. And like he's barely acknowledging her, like it's just like, and I'm asking him questions and I could see like I'm not really getting very much. So, I'd had enough. Like it was, just a piece about, the Stones are ending their tour. They came back and it was a big success and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, when I stopped asking him questions, he relaxed and he just said, oh, thanks for coming out and, blah, blah, blah. And we were talking about what have you been up to? And I said I had gone to see McCartney, who had also gone on the road. And he was very interested in hearing about McCartney's show, you know. And, because the Stones are playing these huge stadiums and McCartney was playing arenas, which nothing to sneeze at. But
Sure.
Jagger was definitely aware of the difference. And the McCartney show is not, I mean, his later shows would be much, much better. But like, it was too cautious. He had like 10 musicians on stage and trying to like encase himself. I explained this to Jagger, and Jagger was registering it, certainly, and enjoying it. And then finally he said, well, look, I've got to get dressed. But again, thanks for coming out. Hope to see you again, blah, blah, blah. I thought, okay, we're very friendly, very chatty. Okay. I go out into the stadium, 65,000 people. It's a domed stadium. And I go to get to my seat. Like, you're in Detroit, man. There's a lot of guys who are drinking. Feel like I'm in a mosh pit just trying to get to my seat. I finally do get there. And when I get there, like the lights drop and the place, it is deafeningly loud. People are cheering. And I forget what music they were playing. It might have been you're playing some of that Moroccan stuff that they were into. And you hear that, and then like you see the band on stage, and the screaming gets louder. And then out of whichever way you're looking at the stage, out of to my right, Jagger comes walking out, and the screaming gets deafeningly loud just at the sight of him. He has not sung a word. He's not even dancing. Just like walking out with this confidence, like, I've got this.
Right.
Like, all of you 65,000 people are here and I've got this. And I just thought, I was just chatting like 25 minutes ago. Like we were just chatting, we were gossiping
Right.
about Paul McCartney and his tour, and you just see what it takes, like that transformation when you're just that guy who's, joking around and laughing and, you know, them very politely saying, you've got to get ready to go do the show. And then you're walking out on stage like you're a fucking god. I mean,
Mhm.
it was amazing to witness that in that juxtaposition, you know,
Wow.
um, you
Night
know,
and day.
completely. But, he loves it. He loves it. I think that's one of the reasons why, you know, you know, look, I mean, knocking wood here, may he stay healthy for years. But I think one of the reasons why, you see, you look at his Instagram and he's like, he's got this pretty girlfriend and he's got his young child and he's close with his other children. And, even Jerry Hall is around now.
I
And,
know. That's crazy.
it's like he loves being Mick Jagger. He just loves it, and that communicates to people and people want to sort of encourage it. And so that's why when he looks across the room, three people get up to see if he wants, like, as John Mulaney says, if he wants a Diet Coke, it just appears. Like, it's like it just nobody even bothers to bring. It's just there, and he has that sort of feel. So anyway, when you're around him, you sort of have to be aware of that. He's not.
Mm.
He's very smart, and he's
Yeah.
fun to write about because yeah, he's always kind of performing in a way, and so he's interesting to observe. But he's not like Keith is much more earnest. Much more like I think Keith. If you ask him a question, as he once said to me, he goes, I never wanted there to be anything that somebody thought they could find out about me by looking through my garbage that they couldn't find out about me by asking me to my face.
Wow.
I think Jagger would think that's ridiculous. Like, why would you confide in this person that you barely know?
Right.
Like, I know it's part of my job. I have to talk to journalists, I mean, Mick has been nice to me. And I think, if somebody were to run into him and say, oh, do you know who Anthony DeCurtis is? And he'd say, oh, yeah, he's a really good writer. He's written great stuff about us. He said as much to me. But, I mean, as far as, Jane Rose, Keith's manager said, like, Anthony, you're part of the family. Like,
Oh.
it's like that kind of, that embrace, the whole Mick finds them, Keith keeps them idea of that band. It's palpable if you're around him. There's no moment that you're not aware that he's Mick Jagger, and no moment that he's not aware of it either.
Yeah. Well, how can it not happen? Like you said, it's in the name, Mick Jagger.
It's just too good. It's
Yeah.
good. That name is just too good. Like it's ridiculous.
It's one of those names where it's already a brand, just the name. You mentioned a couple seconds ago, and you mentioned it during our first talk, and I'd love for you to, if you could paint a small picture of your Stones class. I've been thinking about it ever since you mentioned it and just dreaming what it'd be like to be in it. Are there, what goes on there? I'd love to hear what the curriculum is like.
My daughter is sitting in on it. She's
Cool.
she just got into Penn and it's her first year. She's sitting in on it. It's so funny too, talking to her about it, because I sort of am interested. Like, look, I talked to her before. Then we talked, should we do this? Do you want to do it? Are we going to make other, I don't want to make the other students self-conscious. It's a seminar, so it's a small group, but, and she said, no, yeah, I definitely want to do it. And I'll be cool, I don't want to write the papers. I don't, like she's sitting in, she's just, and, like yesterday, was it yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday. I was, she sat in on this class. And I just said, well, what'd you think of the class? Because I was doing all the stuff of like Stones controversies, played Stupid Girl and
Okay. Under my thumb.
girl in the class said, That sounds like a song a middle school boy would write, you know? Uh, and Under My Thumb,
Yeah.
Stray Cat Blues.
Oh yeah. Oh, you're getting all the big ones.
Yeah, and then, show them the imagery of, I'm Black and Blue from the Rolling Stones, and I love it. Oh, God. Actually, Some Girls played that song.
Did you get into Brown Sugar at all?
Oh, Brown Sugar, of course. Yeah,
Mhm.
we had a lengthy discussion about that.
Wow.
Um, you know, and so like afterwards, I was talking to Francesca, my daughter, and like I wanted, I was curious, I mean, look, she and I are very close, and I trust her opinions and her, I sort of wanted a sense of like, how do you think I did in there, whatever. But like it's almost as if she experiences the class, not that, she participates to a very reasonable amount, like not, she's there. If she has something to say, she says it, but she's not like taking advantage of, whatever.
Mhm.
In fact, she could probably be a little bit more participatory, but she's
Mm.
concerned,
Respectful.
But she said, like I sort of got the sense from what she was saying that she almost experiences it. I was like, we have this other group of people around while she and I are doing what we always do. Like
Oh,
she goes, that's what we always do. Like you play these songs, we talk about them, and you know, we look at stuff together. And I was like, that's not the idea. Like we're at a university. Like it was very funny. Like I couldn't break her out of it. Like I didn't want to force her into a response, but her natural sort of thing was not even to think of it as like I'm sitting in on this class, but it's like we're doing what we ordinarily do, and there's for whatever reason a group of other people around. Uh,
that
you
sounds
know,
wonderful.
we watched the Hyde Park concert.
Mhm.
Watched Gimme Shelter, of course.
Sure.
We watched some of the early videos, the Tammy Show stuff, and watched Rock and Roll Circus. Like I like to watch these things with them in class, collectively, to just see what their responses are like. So it's been, for me, it's like incredible. I mean, this is stuff that rattles around in my brain all day long and has for many years. So like, um, uh, so it's intriguing. The first time I did the Stones was the year when everybody had to go home in the middle of the term because of the COVID thing.
Mhm.
Um, and then suddenly we're doing this class where, the class is going extremely well. And then suddenly it was like literally the school was on spring break, and these kids got an email that said, don't come back. Like, or come back, get your stuff, and go home.
Mm.
Like, so then suddenly, like a week later, we're on Zoom, which I certainly had no idea, what that was. And, we're doing it. And I remember, but the class, one thing that occurred was I felt like, I try to be as accessible and um, it's not like, kind of unteacher like. I speak to them the way I'm speaking to you. I mean, to be honest,
Fantastic.
everybody, like I don't. Well, now the thing you really must understand about the Rolling Stones is, I don't like to do that. It doesn't come naturally to me. Um, but on the other hand, I sometimes feel like, should I be more of a teacher? Should I be more of a um, adult? I guess. And at the when the pandemic hit, I felt like I've got to sort of step up here into the kind of leader mode. Like not just I'm one of the group here and
Right.
we're doing this thing. And when we got back together on Zoom, I remember saying like, look, we've been having a great time, and we are going to continue having a great time. We're going to do everything that we've been doing. You know, it's not, ideal that we're not in the same room together, but there's plenty of stuff still left for us to do, and we're going to enjoy it, you know?
Mhm.
So if there's any issues that you have, please let me know. You know, otherwise we're just going to carry on. And I remember, like, you know, so we went for 5 or 6 weeks like that, and then you know, we're on the last day of classes. I remember saying, you know, we should end with a song. Like, what should we do? Like, we should end with a song. Like, what would be a good one? And this one kid in the class who actually, you know, is, you know, a bright kid. I stayed in touch with him, and he's actually knows Francesca now, interestingly. But
Mm.
he just said, "No expectations."
Nice.
That was the last moment of that class. You know,
Oh, how beautiful.
yeah, it was quite remarkable. So you know, you really do have these, you know, these moments of connection that, you know, that the music makes possible, the band makes possible, the stories make possible.
That's amazing. So you have constant access to see the effects of the music on new generations
Yeah.
coming up, and it's always potent, it sounds like.
Yeah, you know, look, I mean, it self-selects. I mean, the people who are in there, you know, and I tell them at the beginning, you know, I say, look, you don't have to, you know, I don't necessarily like true believers, although, you know, with the Stones, that's about as close as I get to being a true believer. You know, I mean, I know they've made bad records. I could still manage to justify them or speak about them in interesting ways. Or, you know, I was thinking about Jagger's solo records the other day, you know, like, you know, there's things about those records. I mean, Wandering Spirit, I think it's a great record.
Yeah, solid.
And, you know, I said, but like, look, you don't have to be, and you can raise whatever issues you want to raise. You know, I said, the one thing I don't want to do is like constantly be arguing with you. It's like you just can't stand the Rolling Stones. Like, kind of go do something else. You know,
Mhm.
like there's no point for you to be here if all we're going to do is fight. You know, you can again you can raise whatever issues you want, whatever questions you want. There's a reason why this band has been controversial over the years. If anything that they've done bothers you, I'm happy. I mean, it's kind of my job
Mhm.
to enable you to express that and for us to discuss it. So please don't hesitate. But you know, if all you're going to do is complain about them, you know, it's just going to irritate me, and it's not going to be fun for anybody. And so far, nobody's left on that basis. You know, people
Well, as we wrap up here, I have probably the next question here is probably sits at the world's record for the longest gestating follow-up question, because this was something I was thinking about when we first spoke, when we were talking about Mick Jagger's failed attempt to write an autobiography.
yeah.
And it made me wonder, if you were ever approached to help Mick with this endeavor, would you take him up on that? How would you
Oh,
approach that
absolutely.
project?
Yeah. You know, look, I mean, there were very clear reasons why he didn't do it. You know, I mean, he's very English, you
Mhm.
know, and so like for all of the girls and all of the stories and all the stuff that we know, he's never really spoken much about any of that, you know?
Mhm.
Any publisher is gonna want that, you know? I mean, he got Robert Palmer, you know, the great music writer and
Mhm.
friend of mine,
Mhm.
to, you know, cooperate with him, and I think he picked Bob because, you know, Bob is a music guy, you know, totally a music guy. I mean, much less so than me, for example. Palmer really would never have cared who Mick slept with or, you know, any of the personal life stuff. Um, but I would, you know, I would take it on. You know, I don't know how satisfying it would be. You know, like you can't. I mean, I think Mick understands the idea that, you know, he doesn't want to do it. You know, I mean, I think he,
Right.
you know, and so like, would I do it if it came up? Sure. You know how satisfying it would be. You know, I'm not sure. I mean, what I would probably say to him is, look, you know, if I write this book, you're probably not going to like it. You know, like not for any particular reason, because you know you're in the absolute pantheon of my heroes. But Look, I would feel like I needed to report the book, and people would probably say things about you that you don't like.
Hmm.
If you would like me to sort of, collaborate with you, serve as a writer, interview you and turn your own reminiscences, I'd be happy to do that. And that might be the way to go. This way you have control over what's in it, you know. Um, and we'll try to come up with something that everybody's happy with.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't see that happening. There was uh I don't, you may have read this. So far I may be the only person I know who has read, Prince Rupert's book about the Stones. Did you ever
I've
read
not
that?
read that. No.
Oh, it's worth a read. It's not it's worth a read just because it's simultaneously, it's a little bit of like I've stood in your shadow for years, even though I'm the great Rupert, Prince
Mm.
Rupert, as he would immediately tell you. And like, and so I'm going to like kind of get one up on you. So there are a couple of stories in it. Like he tells the story of Jagger being approached about doing a book of his lyrics
Right.
and turning it down. And Prince Rupert said, even though we could have made a lot of money, I sort of admire him because, he sort of understood that his lyrics wouldn't hold up to that treatment. It's just like, oh boy, like number one. But I did read somewhere somebody asked Jagger about that book. And, he just said, well, look, like call me old fashioned, but maybe it occurs to me like maybe the guy who handles your investments, you know, shouldn't really write a memoir about you, you know? And I think Jagger, I mean, much as he was sort of joking, and being kind of wry about it, I think he sort of believes that,
Hmm.
not just because there was embarrassing stuff about him. No, slightly judgmental stuff about him in there. But also, I think that's the reason why he doesn't talk about these women. It's just
Hmm.
sort of like, look, we did whatever we did, you know. I don't think he sees that as cool in any way to just, oh yeah, and then I met this one and I met that one, and you know, I don't think he thinks that's. I don't know what the right word would be, but like respectful, I guess. Like whatever they got up to.
Hmm.
We all know the shenanigans. Anybody who's read the stuff knows the stories, but he's not going to tell them. You know?
Yeah, and I think that's probably going back to the reasons why we like him. We like that he doesn't want to engage in that, and we'll take it. Let the work speak for itself, or just the body of work be the focus. Well, Anthony, as usual, this was incredibly fun. I cannot thank you enough for your
Oh,
generosity.
such a pleasure, man. Really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, so thank you so much. Can we tell everyone where to find you online?
Yes, I'm on Facebook and I'm on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram. I intermittently visit these places. Um, but if you wanted to contact me, you probably could do it through those sites. And if you don't hear from me for a couple of weeks, that only means that I, haven't looked for a couple of weeks. But I go through phases with them, and I'm kind of not that hard to find.
Fantastic, Anthony. Thanks so much for sharing the great stories. We hope to do this again.
Oh, I hope so too, man.